first sound is never footsteps, but wood groaning as though alive. The schoolhouse door, warped by the damp years, exhales a low moan when the wind fingers its edges, a sound that carries across the empty Alabama fields like a mourning hymn. No child has crossed its threshold in a lifetime, yet the air still trembles with the fever of recitation, syllables spoken in voices that no longer exist. The building squats at the edge of a thin grove of pines, their needles thick with resin that never falls. Time has drained the paint from its clapboard walls, leaving them the grey of weathered bone. Its windows, glass long shattered, gape like blind eyes. Grass grows tall in the yard where children once gathered, though no bird dares to land upon it. There is only the door leaning but unbroken, a sentinel to whatever lingers inside. They say if you press your ear to the warped wood, you will hear the cries. Not echoes, not memory, but the wet and stifled sound of children whose lessons ended with a knife rather than a prayer. Those who dared to listen came back changed. One man's hair went white in a single night. A woman who pressed her face too close woke with her lips split open, as if silenced by a hand she could not see. The children who once played near the fields now avert their eyes, muttering prayers when their shadows stretch too near. "Do not lean against it," the elders whisper. Kate leans back, and indeed it does. The door shudders if touched, trembling not from age but as if eager. Some nights, it is said, it strains against its hinges, rattling in its frame like a beast that knows its master has loosed the leash. The frame is carved with strange gouges, some deep enough to fit a finger. Scholars claim they are knife marks, but no one dares measure them in full daylight. Inside, the air is rank with mildew and dust, but beneath it lingers a sharper note, iron, sweet and metallic. When storms break open the sky, the door yawns wide without human hand, slamming and gaping as though the house itself breathes with the thunder. The sound is drowned in rain, but those close enough swear they still hear the other noise. Rising from within, the muffled cadence of a school lesson. The rhythm is unmistakable. A child reciting letters, a pause, then a voice correcting, lower and slower. Only the words never quite align with scripture. They warp into phrases too guttural, too old. The syllables scrape the ear like bone on stone, and even those with no ear for language feel the weight of blasphemy in the air. "Repeat," the phantom teacher hisses through the door, and from the other side, thin voices stutter back, broken, strained, endlessly repeating what they do not understand. The villagers avoid this place, yet the building draws the curious. Travelers who do not heed the warnings approach in daylight, mocking the tales. They walk with bravado through the weeds, jesting about children's stories. But dusk has a way of lingering near the schoolhouse, longer than anywhere else. The light dims too quickly. The air grows heavy as though soaked in breath. Those who press their ear to the door never linger long. Their laughter dies in their throats, replaced by pale silence. Some stumble back with tears streaming, claiming they heard their own name whispered among the cries. Others refuse to speak of what they heard, only muttering through cracked lips that the door remembered them. But once the door opened. A boy, drunk on bravado, forced it wide with both hands. The hinges screamed, and for a moment the interior revealed only dust motes drifting in stillness. He laughed, stepped forward, and disappeared as if the air itself swallowed him. The door slammed shut behind, and when the men of the town beat it down, the schoolhouse yawned empty. No trace of the boy remained, save for the faint echo of a new voice reciting in rhythm with the unseen class. The parents left offerings at the threshold for months afterward, bread, coins, ribbons of hair. None were accepted. The door groaned on, patient and hungry, its voice carrying on the wind like the sound of a child's sob, smothered beneath a hand. Even now, when dusk pools and the fields grow silent, some swear they see small fingerprints pressed against the glassless windows. They fade when approached, leaving only streaks as if dragged away from within. The door rattles then, not with the hollow timbre of wood, but with the thick, wet thud of something that wishes to be let out. One night, a storm rose sudden and fierce. The villagers heard the bell of the schoolhouse tolling, though it had long rusted silent. The door slammed open and shut with each lightning strike, and over the rain came a new sound, rows of voices chanting low and furious, not of children but of something much older, much hungrier, repeating its lesson with perfect obedience. And in the blackest moment before dawn, the wind carried words clear across the fields, spoken in a voice cracked but unmistakable, a teacher's command. Patient and eternal, present yourselves. The door groaned louder than ever before, swelling in its frame like wood about to split, and the cries rose from within, no longer muffled but shrieking, clawing to be heard. The villagers barred their windows and prayed. Yet even as the storm broke and dawn bled across the horizon, the door remained trembling, as though straining against a hand too weak to hold it closed, and then silence, only the hollow, waiting sound of wood breathing in the wind, as if listening for the next ear brave enough to lean close. At night the air thickens inside the schoolhouse, heavy as breath in a coffin. The wooden desks stand in neat rows, each scarred with the desperate carvings of names, children's initials, jagged hearts, crude symbols etched by trembling hands. Yet when dusk seeps into the room and the last streaks of daylight drain from the windows, the carvings begin to seep. Red gathers in the grooves, slow and deliberate, until the letters glisten as though freshly cut into living flesh. The townsfolk whisper that the names are still alive inside the wood, that each scratch was made in a moment of terror as the knife dug deeper than intended, that the wood itself remembers, feeding upon the blood spilled long ago, releasing it again when the night demands its due. No one dares walk those rows after sunset. By lantern light, the room shifts. Chalk dust glimmers like pale ash in the air, and shadows ripple across the floor as though small bodies move unseen between the desks. At the blackboard, faint writing appears and fades, each phrase written in a teacher's hand too steady for the grave. The chalk glides without touch, spelling words that grow darker with each stroke. Lessons no parent would allow, sermons steeped in cruelty. Obedience is the highest virtue. Pain is the clearest teacher. Blood is the price of wisdom. The chalk shrieks as it writes, a sound that burrows into the skull like rusted nails on bone. Those who have witnessed it swear the words tremble faintly, as though wet before sinking into the board, leaving only faint stains that cannot be scrubbed away. Sometimes, if you stand too long in the silence, the room will whisper back, not in the wind, but in the voices of children murmuring from unseen corners, their words stumbling, repeating, stammering like prayers forced from bruised throats. Each line is echoed by another voice, lower, slower, commanding. The rhythm of a lesson. Speak it again, the shadow voice hisses. And the children's chorus repeats, trembling, endless. Some claim the blood that beads on the desks is not the children's alone, that the teacher, the matriarch, the entire family that ruled the place left their mark in red, binding themselves to every cut and every carved line. The building is not a ruin, they say, but a covenant, a house of worship built not for God, but for whatever fed upon the cries inside those walls. One night, long after the school was abandoned, a wandering preacher entered to banish the place of its curse. He carried oil, scripture, and the voice of one who believed himself untouchable. His hymns rattled the windows, and for a moment the air cleared, the desks lying still and lifeless. But then he made the mistake of touching the blackboard. His palm pressed against the faded words, and blood bloomed beneath his skin like ink soaking through paper. He screamed, though the sound was cut short, his lips sealing shut as though stitched by unseen hands. His eyes bulged, reflecting the chalk that now wrote furiously across the board. Not in lessons, but in names. Every child's name. His name among them. By morning, his body was found collapsed across the teacher's desk, his fingers stiff, knuckles snapped as though forced into prayer. The chalkboard behind him bore no words, only streaks of red. The room reeked of iron, and yet no wound could be found upon his flesh. From that day the villagers would not speak of him. They say his name still bleeds from the wood, joining the others when the moon climbs high and the lesson continues. Always the same cadence, the same call and response. The desks drip, the board writes, the whispers chant. Those who linger long enough will feel it gnawing at their minds, reshaping thought into obedience. Some have fled the room screaming, clutching their ears, insisting that the lesson was no longer spoken aloud but carved into their very skull. The blood remembers, the teacher's voice murmurs, patient and eternal. The blood obeys. A scripture of pain was written here, and it cannot be erased. Not with prayer, not with fire, not with the years themselves. Even if the schoolhouse rots to dust, the lesson will remain, carried in the wind, etched in the soil, whispered in the throats of children not yet born, and on certain nights when the fields grow still, when no crickets sing and the pine branches hang motionless, you can still hear it from outside, seeping through the walls in a rhythm too steady, too precise. A classroom recitation from beyond the veil, one voice leading, many voices following. A lesson drenched in crimson. And always before the night ends, the final command, turn the page. The blackboard scratches this phrase in letters so deep they gouge into the wood beneath. And as the room waits in silence, the air quivers as though ready to open into something far worse. Something hidden just beneath the floorboards, hungry to rise. The first thing they remembered was his smile. Not the lessons, not the hymns, not even the sting of the switch on their backs, only the way his mouth stretched wider than it should, too wide, as though it wished to swallow the faces of the children whole. His teeth caught the lantern light like blades stacked in a hunter's kit, gleaming not with warmth, but with the precision of sharpened steel. He would stand in the doorway at dawn, as the fog uncurled across the fields, his figure black against the pale sky. His smile came first, breaking across his face before his words did. The children shuffled past, heads bowed, but each felt it upon them like a hook tugging at the corner of their eye. Some dared glance upward and swore they saw movement in that smile, something shifting in the wet dark of his mouth, a ripple like a shadow unfurling from inside. It seemed to swallow sound, devouring their laughter before it ever left their throats. "He don't teach with words," one boy whispered to another, though his lips trembled as he said it. "He teaches with teeth, and so he did." When he spoke, the syllables seemed less like language and more like the grind of stone upon stone. The children repeated what he commanded, not because they understood, but because silence felt more dangerous. The smile widened with each repetition, pleased, sharp, hungering. It seemed to feed on obedience, stretching further until it threatened to split his face in two. There were nights, the elders recall, when he did not sleep at all. Through the cracked windows, farmers saw the glow of the lantern flicker long past midnight. Inside, the teacher paced, smile carved upon his face, chalk scratching furiously across the board. And when the chalk broke, the sound of his teeth grinding against one another filled the silence. Long, slow, deliberate, as though each bite was shaping the words into being. No one knew from where he came. He arrived with his family like a storm that had no beginning, settling upon the schoolhouse, with the authority of one who had always belonged. He carried no books, no satchel, only that endless grin. The town believed him holy at first, his sermons sharp, his scripture memorized without pause. But it was not God's word he taught. The verses twisted in his mouth, phrases bent into shapes that crawled under the skin. He smiled through every syllable, even when they were blasphemies disguised as lessons. "Repeat," he whispered, grin unmoving. And the children's thin voices followed, stumbling, faltering. "Louder," they shouted, throats raw. "Again," until their voices broke. Some swore the smile grew when the children wept, that it stretched not just wider but deeper, curving back into his jaw, as though it opened onto something bottomless. Once a girl stared too long into his teeth and screamed, not at the mouth itself, but at what she swore she saw within, a second set of jaws, serrated, waiting. Hungrier than the first, the punishments came to those who resisted. A boy who refused to recite was brought forward to the teacher's desk. No hand struck him. No cane fell. Only the smile, wide and merciless, leaning closer until his teeth touched the boy's ear. The boy collapsed, screaming, clawing at his head as if trying to tear something out. When he rose again, his eyes were blank and his voice steady. He joined the others, reciting without hesitation, lips moving like a puppet's. "Good," the teacher murmured, smiling still. "Very good." From that day the boy no longer laughed. His mouth moved, but the sound never reached the air, as though stolen before it left him. His family buried him months later, though no illness touched his flesh. They say his final expression was not sorrow, but a grin too wide for his own face. The villagers grew afraid, but none dared challenge the teacher. His sermons bled from the schoolhouse into the church, twisting prayer into something unholy. When he stood at the pulpit, his smile cut through the congregation like a blade, and every tongue bent to his command. He devoured the room with that grin, swallowing hymn and silence alike, until only his voice filled the air. Even now the boards of the schoolhouse creak with echoes of it. The faint glimmer of teeth appears in the dark, floating where no face remains. The smile lingers, independent of flesh, etched into the very walls like a curse carved in ivory. And if you stand too long within, you will feel it upon you, stretching your lips without your will, pulling at your jaw until the corners crack and bleed, for the teacher's smile was never his alone. It was an inheritance, a hunger passed down, a maw that demanded to be fed. And on certain nights, when the moon hangs low and blood pools on the carved desks, the air splits with the sound of laughter, high, shrill, endless. Yet no child makes it. It pours from the dark mouth of the building itself, a grin carved into the night sky. The last thing one ever sees before the blackness takes hold is a flash of teeth glinting like polished steel, a smile that swallows everything it touches, and in the silence that follows, the door creaks open just enough to show the next horror waiting inside. The table was always set, though no flesh and blood hand had touched its surface in decades. Long after the schoolhouse emptied, long after the fields fell silent, the dining room remained prepared, bowls arranged in strict symmetry, spoons polished to a dull gleam, candles burning though no wax was ever replaced. The air inside the room was sour with tallow and iron, as if meat had rotted on the bone and dissolved into the very wood. The villagers remembered the family's suppers. They remembered how the children were called in from their lessons, not dismissed with freedom, but marched in order down the hall, their faces pale and stiff. The mother stood at the head of the table, her dress black as pitch, her hair drawn tight until her scalp gleamed. The father sat opposite, smile wide, teeth glinting, eyes shining as though reflecting a light too bright to be of this world. And around them the bowls waited, always empty, always expectant. It was said that their feast was not of bread or broth, not of flesh or grain, but of something drawn unseen from the room itself. Hunger was the first prayer, silence the second. They would lower their heads and mutter in unison, their voices weaving together like strands of rope tightening around a neck. Our Father who devours, our Mother who consumes, grant us portion, grant us power, the children repeated, their whispers fragile as moth wings. With each prayer the air grew thicker, a weight pressing into the lungs until breath itself felt like a tithe. The candles flickered not with wind, but with movement beneath the flame, shadows shifting, teeth glinting in the wax, and then came the sound, faint at first, then rising, chewing, smacking, the steady rhythm of mouths working upon food unseen. The bowls remained empty, yet the spoons clinked against their rims, moving of their own accord, dipping into nothing and rising slick, glistening, dripping with what could not be named. Those who dared peek into the windows told of visions that curdled their sleep. They swore the bowls filled only when the prayers reached their final verse, when every voice trembled in perfect harmony. Then the shapes appeared, not bread, not meat, but pulsing lumps that writhed and bled when pierced. The family ate ravenously, lips slick, eyes rolled back in bliss, as if each mouthful was drawn not from earth but from something older, deeper, darker. Do not look long, the elders warned. It will see you watching. For the feast was never meant for eyes uninvited. Once a farmhand lingered too close, peering through the warped glass. The mother's head turned without haste, her black eyes finding him through shadow. Her lips parted, voice low as a hymn. Come, sit, be filled. The boy staggered back, but the hunger followed. It clawed his belly, gnawed his ribs, drove him to the fields where he tore fistfuls of grass and mud into his mouth. By dawn his lips were raw, his teeth broken. He died with soil still packed beneath his tongue. The villagers buried him quickly, but each night after his name was heard at the table, spoken in a hollow chant. He was given a seat. He was given a bowl. His portion was eternal. The prayers, they say, were not to God. The words bent towards something older, something whose name tasted of rust and ash. Each syllable dragged across the air like chains being pulled through stone. And always, always it answered. The candles flared. The bowls brimmed. The family fed. No hunger in town ever lasted long, though no one could explain why. Livestock fattened unnaturally quick. Grain never spoiled. Yet each blessing carried a cost. Children vanished in their sleep. Blood streaks were found on doors, too high for any hand to reach. And from the schoolhouse chimney smoke rose thick and red, though no fire burned within. Still the feast continued. It was not bound by time or death. Even now, when the house lies silent and the fields lie barren, the table waits. At dusk the candles flare, at midnight the bowls glisten, and if you listen close enough, pressing your ear to the broken window pane, you will hear the prayers whispered still, their voices overlapping, mouths too full to close. Sometimes, if you dare to look, you will see them. The family gathered, heads bowed, shadows flickering too long, teeth flashing in the candlelight, empty bowls brimming with what is not food. And on the table at the head where the mother once stood, a space remains empty. A chair pulled back, a bowl waiting. A place set not for the family but for the next guest called by hunger. The air thickens. The prayers rise. The spoons rattle. And beneath it all a sound begins, low and guttural. A growl, deep as stone cracking, coming not from mouths but from the floor itself. The feast is not theirs alone. It never was. And as the shadows lengthen across the table, dripping from the walls like blood made liquid, the growl becomes a voice. A command that rattles the boards and shakes the flame. Open. The floorboards split, a jagged mouth yawning wide beneath the table. Darkness breathes upward, cold and wet, carrying with it the smell of rot and bone. The family leans forward, smiling, spoons raised. The air grew colder before the cellar door was ever touched, as if the ground itself exhaled a warning of what lay beneath. Beneath the warped floorboards of the schoolhouse, the earth had darkened to a hue that no sunlight could bleach. It was a blackened memory pressed into soil, soil that drank not rain but something older, blood, sweat, and a sorrow that had seeped through generations. Every plank of wood above whispered underfoot, quivering with the weight of the secrets it bore, each groan a muted scream begging to be heard. Locals said the cellar had no beginning, no end, only a spiral of darkness that hunched beneath the house like a hibernating beast. Rusted chains clung to the walls, knotted to thick posts sunk into the dirt, their links frozen mid-rattle. Even decades later, if one pressed an ear against the floorboards, the faint scrape of nails across the dirt could be heard, scratches too deliberate to be random, too cruel to be natural. It was as if the soil remembered each cry, each pleading hand that had clawed at it, and still recorded the motions in silence. The stairs to the cellar were narrow, slick with something that gleamed faintly in moonlight, that forced its way through cracked windows. They groaned as though alive, warning all who dared descend. And at the bottom the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a slow rhythm, as if inhaling the terror of the world above and exhaling it into the darkness. Candles, long melted to black stumps, lined the perimeter. Their wicks stood rigid, untouched by flame, yet still they cast shadows, shapes that moved without the wind, curling around corners, reaching out for the feet of anyone brave or foolish enough to step inside. The smell of iron was thick, heavy, clinging to the nose and throat, searing memory into the mind, a reminder that the cellar had been used not for hiding, but for offering, for discipline, for feeding something hungry. Chains rattled without wind. Shackles swung gently from hooks embedded in the dirt walls, their iron groaning as though weighted by bodies, long vanished. Some said you could hear the sound of scratching beneath the dirt itself, nails dragged through clay, through roots, through the remains of those who had been taken. Others swore they heard whispers, low and pleading, voices from a time when the house was young and cruel. "Please, not tonight," they would hiss, only to be cut off by a sound deeper than a human throat could produce. The chains responded, rattling in cadence with the whispers, and when the whispers ceased, the echoes lingered, pressing against the walls, vibrating into the bones of anyone who had dared descend. The floor itself bore markings, carved not with tools but with purpose, grooves that led in spirals and lines, winding like veins through the dirt. The villagers who had once dared peek saw them as maps, routes not meant for travel but for capture. At the center of it all lay a pit, lined with stone and wet with the years. It had no bottom, only a darkness so thick it seemed to swallow sound, light, even the hope of escape. It was here the family came at night, carrying lanterns and implements that shone too brightly against the shadows. The children of the schoolhouse were brought down, feet scraped raw on the stairs, lips silent with terror. The family's hands moved like priests, guiding the terrified into position, never a word of comfort, only the brushing of cloth and the tug of chains. "Do not resist," the mother whispered once, voice low as the earth itself. Her son added, "It hungers and you are its meal." The chains bit into flesh, leaving only bruises at first, though later marks were far worse. Blood pooled in the grooves of the pit, darkened to a rich black, almost blending with the soil, almost invisible, but never fully hidden. The screams that came from the cellar did not rise through the stairwell, but sank into the earth, vibrating back through the floorboards above, heard as groans, coughs, or creaks in the empty room. Even after the family departed, long after the schoolhouse was abandoned, the cellar remained alive. Nails still scraped, chains still rattled, and the pit waited, breathing slow and deliberate. One visitor, daring to descend in the dead of night, swore he felt hands grip his ankles from the dirt itself, dragging him toward the pit. He broke free and ran, leaving scratches deep across his palms and knees, but the marks were minor compared to the terror etched into his mind. He never spoke again, only sitting by the fire, staring into flames as though trying to burn the image from his memory. And the cellar was patient, eternally patient. Its hunger never ceased. Those who peered too long into the darkness saw shapes that moved beneath the soil, faces pressed against the underside of the earth, mouths open in silent screams. The chains sometimes lifted, suspended in mid-air, the links rattling like skeletal tongues. The villagers whispered that the cellar was not entirely of this world, that it had been carved into the earth not merely for punishment, but to summon and house what the family had worshipped for generations. That something older than the house, older than the town itself, had burrowed beneath, waiting, feeding, dreaming through the soil. A curious traveler, drawn by rumor, once lowered a lantern into the pit, letting its light fall over the black soil. For a heartbeat he saw movement, tiny, writhing shapes, pale and thin, faces twisting in silent agony. Then the lantern went dark, as though the darkness itself had swallowed the flame. The chains rattled above, and a voice low and wet whispered from the pit, "Welcome. You belong now." The traveler vanished. The villagers say the pit consumed him slowly, a meal that did not end. And the chains? They swung back into place still. The scratches in the earth smoothed over themselves, leaving only whispers behind for the next soul to descend. Even today, the schoolhouse floor creaks above the hidden cellar. If one stands long enough, pressing an ear to the boards, the sound of nails scraping beneath rises again, urgent, searching, endless, and from the darkness below, a shape stirs, a hand pale as clay stretching upward toward the floorboards, fingers curling as though to claim the next curious eye, the next wandering soul who dares descend. The bell tolled long before anyone dared approach the schoolhouse, though no hand had touched its rope in decades. High above the rotting roof, the iron bell swung in slow arcs, its clapper striking with a sound that rumbled through bone and soil alike. The villagers said the tone was too deep, too resonant, carrying not merely across the fields but into the chest, the skull, and the very marrow. When it rang, it was not a signal for lessons, not a call to order, but a summons for something older, something hungry, something that counted each toll as a name carved into eternity. The bell had always been more than an instrument of sound. Locals whispered that it had been cast in iron not for song, but for warning. Its metal mingled with ash from the first victims of the family. The rope frayed, the mount rusted, yet still it moved of its own accord. When the wind blew from the south, it rang softly. When the air hung still, it rang louder, each toll a drumbeat of unseen footsteps crossing the fields. And with each toll, the earth along the edges of the property shifted, softening as though inhaling the sound. By morning, new graves appeared, small and neat, carved into soil darkened by years of rain and neglect. No markers, no signs, only the disturbed earth itself. Sometimes the graves were empty. Sometimes, if one peered too closely, faint whispers seeped from them, urgent, pleading, reciting names that had been long forgotten or never spoken aloud. One night, a group of boys, braver than wise, climbed the bell tower in hopes of silencing it. Their lanterns trembled in the wind, casting flickering shadows against the timbers blackened with age. As they reached the bell, it began to swing violently. Though no breeze stirred, the clapper striking iron like hammer on bone. One boy's lantern fell, glass shattering, fire rolling across the tower like spilled blood. The others fled, only to find the rope climbing back into place as if guiding itself to the hand of some unseen conductor. "Do you hear it?" one whispered, voice tight as cord. "Yes, it counts," another replied, teeth chattering. Each toll echoed across the fields like a heartbeat, and in that rhythm, the boys could feel their own names being written in the soil beyond the tree line. By dawn, the villagers found the boys huddled at the edge of the graveyard, eyes wide, lips blue, trembling. They spoke only in fragments, describing the bell as alive. its iron teeth gnashing with delight, its voice murmuring in a tongue older than the town itself. One boy swore it had spoken directly to him, promising to claim the next child who dared to hear its call. The bell tolls at odd hours now, unpredictable, a cadence that cannot be planned. Farmers hear it while ploughing. Travelers hear it when the road is empty. Some claim that if you sleep while it rings, your dreams will be filled with rows of graves forming, one by one, each accompanied by the wet sound of soil being turned, each grave holding a name that echoes your own. Inside the schoolhouse, the bell seems to call not to the children, not to the living, but to something beneath. From the hidden cellar comes a faint vibration, a low hum that merges with the clanging, a resonance so deep that it shakes dust from the ceiling and rouses the long dead from the soil. Chains respond, shackles sway, and faint nails scrape against dirt as if counting along. The family, or what remains of it, never attends the tolling. Their forms have grown thin, shadowed, barely tethered to the earth, yet they smile when the bell rings, leaning from windows or peering through cracks. Their whispers mingle with the toll, voices sweet and low. Another joins the lesson. Another learns obedience. Another is fed. Some nights, the bell rings without wind, without hands, without warning. Those who hear it awake to see the schoolhouse shrouded in smoke, the doors wide, shadows moving between rooms like liquid ink. By morning, a new grave rests at the edge of the property. Soil still moist, air pungent with iron, and always, one of the villagers feels a weight pressing into their chest, the unmistakable awareness that their name has been noted. The old preacher who once dared to enter the house warned that the bell's toll was a contract. Each chime a signature written in flesh and soil, a ledger of souls claimed by the house and its masters. Those who try to ignore it may survive the night, but the echo lingers in dreams, following their steps, muttering their names, and promising a visit to the cellar, to the feast, to the graves below. On one such night when the moon hung low and the fields were misted with fog, the bell tolled 12 times in rapid succession. The sound shattered windows miles away, shaking the earth. From the tower a figure emerged, a child, pale, eyes empty, lips moving silently in a chant. Behind it, the air shimmered with the faint outline of many more, small forms appearing and vanishing in a sequence that matched the bell's tolling. And as the villagers watched in horror, the final toll struck louder than all before, reverberating in every bone, every tree, every heart. A grave cracked open at the edge of the property. Soil upturned violently, and from within a hand clawed upward, fingers splayed like the roots of a tree reaching for the sky. The bell had rung again, and the count had begun anew. The song began long before anyone saw her, drifting through the cracked windows like smoke from a dying fire. Her voice was soft, melodic, too sweet for the world outside the schoolhouse, yet heavy with something darker, something that clung to the air and dripped into the ears of any who dared listen. She sat by the window, rocking an empty cradle, her shadow stretching along the floorboards like ink spilled across the grain. The lullaby wound through the halls, curling around the desks, brushing along the blackboard, sliding into the hidden cellar beneath. No child slept well when it was sung. The melody carved itself into their dreams, each note sharp as glass, each refrain pressing against the bones of the skull. They said the song remembered their fear, reshaping it into a rhythm that demanded obedience, a cadence that made every heartbeat echo with anticipation. Some who heard it swore the lullaby whispered their names, calling them forward, luring them closer to the cradle that never held them. The mother's face was calm, serene, almost holy, but the eyes told another story. Black pools glimmered, reflecting the candlelight like oil on water, swallowing the room in their depths. Occasionally her lips parted in a smile too wide, too precise, and those who looked long enough swore they saw something living inside, something hungry, something older than her own flesh. Sleep, she cooed, voice dripping as though thickened by blood. And the children obeyed, not in rest, but in shivering stillness, trembling as if the sound could crawl into their chest and grip their heart. The cradle moved of its own accord. It rocked slowly at first, then faster, the empty space within bouncing as though carrying a weight unseen. Shadows pooled beneath it, black shapes that shifted and writhed, responding to the melody. Some nights, villagers walking past the house claimed to see tiny hands reach up from the cradle, fingers thin and pale, trying to grasp the rails, only to vanish the moment they were seen. "Mother?" A whisper echoed from the hall, barely audible, swallowed by the notes. "Yes, child," she replied, voice soft as velvet, but each syllable carried a knife's edge. "Please." "Shh. Listen," she murmured, and the lullaby grew sharper, slicing the air, curling around ribs, tugging at lungs. The room seemed to breathe with her. The walls flexed, bending inward and outward like the chest of some vast sleeping creature. Candle flames flickered violently, throwing the rocking cradle's shadow into grotesque shapes. Elongated limbs, twisted faces, mouths opening wide in silent screams. The scent of honey and iron hung thick, sweet and metallic, clinging to clothing, hair and skin. She moved slowly, deliberately, standing to trace her fingers along the window pane. Each touch left a smear, not of glass but of darkness, sticky and warm like oil mixed with blood. Outside the mist thickened, curling along the yard and creeping toward the villagers' doors. Children in nearby houses awoke, shivering, calling for parents who were too far to answer. Their ears still ringing with the tale of her song, the cradle rocked faster. Now, as though responding to an invisible hand, something pulsed beneath it, a rhythm faint yet steady, the beat of something living, something ancient. The boards above the hidden cellar groaned, chains rattled, nails scraped against the soil below. The lullaby seemed to reach downward, calling to the darkness, summoning it upward toward the empty arms of the mother. A curious boy, braver than his fear, crept toward the window. His lantern cast a small circle of light, trembling across the floor. He saw her then in full, the mother pale and serene, lips moving in perfect harmony with the rising and falling cradle. And in the cradle, a shadow coiled black and glossy, writhing like a living thing, reaching upward for the melody that carried it. The boy stumbled back. She turned, eyes catching his lantern light. For a heartbeat she was human. Then her mouth stretched impossibly wide, the teeth gleaming sharper than any knife, the shadow of her tongue flicking like a snake's strike. The lullaby did not stop. It wrapped around his chest, squeezed his lungs and forced him to his knees. "Come closer," she whispered, voice sweet, dripping, a command sharpened into steel. He could not move. His eyes were drawn to the cradle, to the pulsing shadow, to the blackness curling around it like water. Shapes formed in the darkness, faces pale, eyes empty, mouths open in silent screams, reaching for the mother, for the song, for him. The candlelight faltered. The shadows stretched long and thin, creeping along the walls, pooling around his feet. The air was thick, heavy, filled with the smell of honey, iron, and rot. And above it all the lullaby continued, rising to a crescendo, sharper now, slicing into his bones with every note. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the song stopped. Silence fell like a blanket soaked in blood. The cradle hung still. The mother's shadow leaned forward, resting her chin upon the rail, her smile calm and terrifying. She did not move. She did not breathe. And yet the air throbbed with anticipation, a heartbeat out of rhythm with the world, as if the house itself were waiting. Outside, the mist curled closer, obscuring the yard, hiding graves and shadows alike. Something slid from the darkness toward the window pane, thin, pale, and eager. It pressed its face against the glass, eyes wide, mouth moving silently in rhythm with the lullaby that had ended, but still lingered. And in that moment, the boy realized the truth. The song never truly ended. It merely waited for the next ear, the next shoulder to lean close, the next soul to tremble beneath its sweetness. The mother's lips parted once more, and a whisper, faint and cold, carried through the silent room. "Do not close your eyes, or join them." The lantern flickered, shadows convulsed, and the cradle tilted forward, an empty space at its center swelling with darkness, waiting to receive what it had sung for all these years. The Bible never slept, yet it breathed, and when opened it exhaled a chill that froze the marrow. Its leather cover was cracked and stained, darkened by years of candle smoke and something unnameable, an oil-like residue that shimmered faintly in lamplight. The pages were stiff, but not from age alone. They bore an imprint deeper than words, a script pressed into the pulp that seemed to move when no eye looked directly. It whispered, rustling faintly even in still air, as though hungry for the attention of any soul daring enough to approach the lectern. The congregation came faithfully, drawn by fear, obligation, and something they could not name. Each Sunday the family stood at the front of the chapel, mother and father flanking the pulpit, children arranged in perfect line behind them. The Bible opened, and the first words poured forth, not soft, not pious, but sharp as razors, slicing into the mind, into memory, into belief itself. "The Lord is with us," the father would begin, voice sweet and commanding, eyes glinting as though reflecting some hidden fire. And yet the verses twisted, morphing in his mouth, bending to the family's will. What should have offered comfort instead pressed upon the chest, weighed the tongue and bound the spirit. The congregation repeated after him, each syllable a shackle, each phrase tightening invisible chains, no one left. Not by choice, not by will. Even those who tried to flee found themselves stumbling back through unseen corridors, feet guided, eyes forced toward the words on the page. Whispered curses wrapped around the hymns, mingling with the scent of candle wax, honey, and rust. And the Bible. The Bible seemed alive, humming faintly with a vibration that pulsed through the floorboards, through the pews, into the very bones of the listeners. A young girl, barely 10, felt the pull first. Her knees buckled beneath her as the father intoned a line about salvation. But salvation was not offered here. Only obedience, submission, and fear. She whispered a question, small, trembling. "Father, what is this?" The mother's eyes found her, black, endless, like two wells of night. "It is faith," she said softly. "Faith is everything." And the girl's voice died in her throat, swallowed by the weight of unseen chains wrapping around her heart. The pages of the Bible turned themselves at odd intervals, flipping to passages that bore no resemblance to the gospel, commands, threats, incantations written in ink black as the soil beneath the schoolhouse. The congregation's lips moved mechanically, echoing words they did not understand, as if the pages themselves dictated both thought and action. Some who attended for years began to see shapes behind the words, shadowed forms slinking along the edges of the pulpit, long-limbed figures kneeling in the aisles, mouths opening in silent pleas or laughter. The sermons drew the darkness in, feeding it, shaping it, until it pressed like water against the walls. And the Bible, perched atop its lectern, pulsed with every breath of fear, every twitch of hesitation, every faltering heart in the room. A visitor once dared to touch it. His fingers brushed the edges of the pages, and the moment he did, the candle flames flared, shadows twisting, elongating into figures with eyes too bright, teeth too sharp. The words on the page seemed to shift, writhing beneath his gaze, spelling not salvation but doom. He stumbled backward, tripping over the pews, and when he looked again, the Bible lay closed, still and innocent. But the impression remained, burned into his mind, the knowledge that faith here was not free, not comforting and not forgiving. From that day, he heard it constantly, the rustle of pages in empty rooms, whispers in hallways, syllables repeating themselves in his sleep. He became a prisoner not of chains, but of belief twisted beyond understanding, bound by doctrines written in blood and ink. The congregation's devotion grew unnaturally. Some felt compelled to offer their own children to the family's design, believing the chains of faith would spare them. Those who resisted were marked subtly at first, small bruises, shadows clinging to their steps, but eventually the punishment became visible, undeniable, faint scratches appearing on the skin, red lines tracing the words from the Bible onto their flesh, a map of obedience written in pain, and always the Bible awaited the next hand to open it, the next voice to recite, the next soul to bind. On one such night, a storm gathered, lightning slicing across the sky. The family's shadows stretched impossibly along the walls, moving independently of their bodies. The father's hand lifted, pointing to a passage that twisted and shimmered with something alive. The words floated above the page, letters shifting into forms of faces screaming, eyes wide, mouths opening and closing in silent wails. The congregation kneeled, heads bowed, unaware that each syllable now wrote itself not in paper but in spirit, etching invisible shackles around hearts, lungs, and minds. One elder dared to glance up, and in that brief moment saw the family's eyes gleaming not with devotion, but with hunger. The Bible had become a conduit, a vessel for something older than creed, older than the land, something that fared not on prayer but on submission, on fear, on devotion twisted to terror, and then the room went silent. The pages of the Bible snapped shut on their own. A chill swept through the chapel, knocking candles over extinguishing flames. Shadows converged around the lectern, long fingers of blackness curling into the congregation, tightening with each exhaled breath. The father whispered, voice low, "Faith is eternal, and so is its price." A faint scraping rose from the floorboards beneath, chains rattling in response, echoing the hidden cellar below. The congregation shivered, trapped not by walls, not by doors, but by the invisible shackles wrapping around their very souls. The last candle flickered. The shadows leaned forward, pressing in, the letters on the Bible glowing faintly as if alive, spelling a final command, bind them. And somewhere in the dark, the chains groaned, waiting for the next faithful hand, the next recitation, the next soul to be marked forever. The smoke began before anyone smelled it, curling from the chimney like a serpent of black silk, impossibly light, yet choking with every breath. The hearth below had been cold for decades, its stones cracked and sooty, abandoned to the quiet of dust and neglect. Yet the chimney exhaled a bitter smoke, heavy with iron and ash, that wound through the town like a river of poison. It carried a scent of decay, honey, and copper, sweet and metallic at once, and it curled into every corner of every home, whispering to lungs, ears, and minds alike. Children were the first to feel its effect. Eyes watering, skin pale, lips trembling with fevered mutterings, they dreamt of hands, small, blood-soaked, reaching from nowhere and everywhere at once. The hands clawed at their bedsheets, at their chests, at their throats, always slipping through fingers as though made of liquid, always leaving behind the stink of iron and rot. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of the smoke's arrival, noting its wind patterns, its strange persistence. No matter the hour, no matter the weather, the tendrils found a way inside homes, coiling around windowsills, snaking down chimneys that had long been sealed. Some claimed the ashes themselves moved, forming shapes, faces twisted and pale, mouths agape, eyes wide with despair or hunger. And when a person dared to step outside, the wind seemed to pull at their hair, their clothes, their very skin, as if it sought to claim something more than breath. The schoolhouse itself remained the origin. The chimney glowed faintly, embers unseen licking the bricks from within. The smoke carried whispers, low and urgent, voices speaking in a language older than memory. "Join us, join us, join us." The cadence of the whispers was hypnotic, insidious, tugging at the mind, filling every silent space with dread. One night, a father ventured out to see the source, carrying his sick child wrapped in a blanket. He climbed to the yard near the schoolhouse, eyes drawn to the chimney's glow, and saw it, ash rising in coils, shaping itself into forms he could not name. Faces appeared, pressed against the smoke like hands on glass, mouths open in silent screams. They swayed as though dancing to a tune only they could hear, their eyes black and infinite. Glimmering with malevolent intelligence, the child in his arms whimpered, tugging at his sleeve, pointing at the smoke. "They want me." The voice trembled, barely audible. "Shh, shh, it's nothing," the father whispered. But the smoke ignored him, curling higher, slithering closer, slipping through hair and clothing like mist made solid. From inside the schoolhouse a candle flickered, though no wind blew. Its light fell across the floorboards, illuminating scratches and grooves etched over decades. The chains in the hidden cellar rattled in sync with the smoke's movements, a rhythm of hunger and anticipation. Somewhere below a shadow shifted, stretching upward, reaching toward the chimney as if drawn by the rising ash. "Come closer," a voice called, hollow and sweet, dripping like honey from the walls. The father froze. The smoke parted briefly, revealing a figure at the window. The mother, pale and still, rocking her empty cradle. Her eyes were black pools that mirrored the ashen shapes in the air. Her lips moved, singing the lullaby, soft and cutting, sharper than any knife. The wind carried the song into the father's chest, forcing a rhythm upon his heart, compelling it to beat in cadence with the cradle, the chains, the smoke. The child's cries rose in tandem, muffled by the growing roar of whispers and the smell of iron and honey that filled every pore. And then the ashes fell. Not gently, but like rain of black needles, slicing the air and lodging in hair, eyes, and lungs. The father coughed, choking as the smoke thickened. Hare's shadows lengthened, and as the whispers swelled into a chorus of infinite hunger, he stumbled back, clutching the child, but the yard itself seemed to warp, the earth beneath shifting like water. Graves formed at the edge of the property, small and neat, soil dark and wet. Some opened before his eyes, hands emerging first, groping, grasping, dragging unseen bodies back into the earth. The air hummed with their despair, the stink of their presence clinging to every inhalation. From the chimney, the smoke twisted into a new form, a figure thin, elongated, draped in blackened rags that seemed fused to its body. Eyes hollow, mouth stretched wide, it leaned from the brickwork, reaching downward, pulling the wind, the ash, the child toward the house. "Take me, take me." The child's voice joined the chorus of the smoke, trembling, pleading, already halfway claimed. "No!" the father shouted, trying to resist, but the air conspired, tugging him forward. The ashes clinging like hands, pushing, pulling, insisting. Inside the schoolhouse, candles flared, shadows writhed, and a sound rose from the hidden cellar, the scraping of nails, the chains rattling, a pulse deep in the earth. It was the heartbeat of the house itself, awakened by the wind and smoke, by the rising chorus of whispers, by the hunger that fed on fear, on devotion, on every trembling soul it could reach. The smoke thickened further, forming a column that twisted like a spine, black and writhing, stretching from chimney to yard, from earth to sky. Within it, pale faces pressed outward, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes fixed on the child, on the father, on anyone who dared look too long. And in the final moment before the wind claimed them, the father caught a glimpse of the mother at the window, her lips curved in a smile that was sweet, sharp, eternal. The cradle beneath her rocked violently, a shadow swelling inside, stretching, reaching, ready to swallow all it touched. The ashes swirled faster, the wind howled, the smoke coiled upward, carrying with it the scent of honey and iron, of earth and blood. And through it all the whispers rose, "Join us, join us, join us." The father fell to his knees, the child trembling in his arms, and the smoke, alive and patient, wrapped around them, pulling, claiming, binding, feeding. The sky darkened, the wind sharpened, and a final, blackened hand emerged from the ash, long fingers reaching outward, toward the next soul. The classroom waited, hollow and patient, as though it had been expecting them for centuries. Desks stood in rows like silent sentinels, each carved with initials and symbols older than the town itself. The air hung thick with dust, but it moved as if alive, curling and writhing around corners, lifting in small spirals, responding to some invisible rhythm. The sunlight could not reach this room. The shadows clung to walls and floors, growing darker with each step, whispering faintly in voices that were not quite human. One by one the names were called. A ledger lay open on the teacher's desk, pages yellowed, corners frayed, ink faded but still legible. The father, standing at the pulpit, spoke each name clearly, deliberately, letting the syllables roll heavy in the air like stones dropped into a well of silence. Thomas. The chains in the hidden cellar rattled. A distant scraping rose from beneath the floorboards, rhythmic and urgent like nails against bone. No voice replied, yet the sound answered, resonating through the room, vibrating along the walls, along the desks, through the spines of those who dared to listen. Mary. A chair scraped backward slowly, as though someone had risen from it, though no one was there. The shadow of a figure flickered across the blackboard, elongated, monstrous, stretching impossibly from floor to ceiling. A faint odor of iron, sweet and metallic, filled the air, settling in the throat and lungs like a warning. Jonathan. A wind stirred, cold and unnatural, pushing the hair of the empty desks like the hands of the dead reaching for the living. The candle flames trembled, flickered, then stretched toward the ceiling as if in fear, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that bled into one another. Something moved beneath the floorboards, chains dragging across earth, boots heavy with soil, a whisper low and urgent. Here, here, here. The children's names continued, each syllable a chain tightening invisibly around those present. Each name a summons, each rattle a reminder that the room had a memory, that the house had a mind older than any living thing, older than the town itself. Eleanor. A faint, wet sound echoed from the hidden cellar, like flesh being pressed, torn, reshaped. Shadows pressed against the walls in response to the name, faces forming briefly in the grain of the wood, pale, wide-eyed, mouths opening in silent screams. They vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving only the sense that the children's spirits were being called home, drawn into the room, drawn into the school, drawn into something hungry that had been waiting all along. The mother appeared at the window, pale and calm, rocking her empty cradle in slow, deliberate arcs. The lullaby hummed faintly in the air, its melody now sharpened, cutting across the sound of chains and scraping tools. The cradle cast a shadow that twisted and shifted, lengthening across the room until it touched every desk, every floorboard, every corner of the walls. Within it, darkness pulsed, breathing, swelling with anticipation. Samuel. The tools in the classroom stirred. Chalkboards scratched themselves, knives and hooks, rusted and dull, rattled in drawers where no hand had touched them for years. They moved as though pulled by invisible strings, raised and lowered, scraping against one another, singing a chorus of quiet menace. The ledger's pages fluttered, turning themselves in a windless room. Words lifted off the page, glowing faintly before curling into shapes. Letters stretching into limbs, sentences writhing like worms, phrases forming the semblance of faces that screamed in silence. Each name called became a thread, weaving the living and the dead into a tapestry of obedience, terror, and despair. A young boy dared to whisper, voice trembling, Is it over?" The mother's shadow at the window leaned forward, head tilting, eyes reflecting the candlelight like black pools of oil. "Never," she whispered, soft, sweet, deadly. "It is only beginning." The cradle rocked faster, though still empty, shadows beneath it writhing, thickening, forming shapes that hinted at forms human and otherwise. The rattle of chains grew louder, now joined by a wet scraping like nails against flesh. The father spoke again, ledger open, voice low and deliberate. "Final name." Silence fell. The room itself seemed to inhale, waiting. Dust hung in the air, motionless, heavy with expectation. Then he spoke, and the syllable rolled through the room like a stone thrown into a grave. "Yours." The chains below screeched. The floorboards groaned under weight unseen. Shadows peeled away from the walls, crawling along the floor toward the center of the room. The desks quivered as though alive, pupils of desks, if desks had eyes, staring at the one called, absorbing, feeding, marking the next soul for the ledger of the house. The boy, paralyzed, felt the invisible chains tightening. A hand, pale, elongated, glistening faintly like wet ink, rose from the shadows at the foot of his desk. It hovered, trembling, stretching, reaching for him, for the ledger, for the sound of the names still ringing in the air. The candle flames faltered. Shadows snapped into forms of bodies long dead, mouths opening wide, teeth glinting. Whispers rose in a crescendo, voices overlapping, repeating every syllable, echoing every name ever called in this house. Thomas. Mary. Jonathan. Eleanor. Samuel. Yours. Yours. The mother's lullaby rose once more, soft, sweet, deadly, threading through the chaos, knitting together chains and shadows and ash. The cradle at the window shivered violently. The ledger's pages fluttered again, words crawling off the page like black insects, tracing names in the air, spelling them across walls, floors, and the hearts of those present. The boy's knees buckled. The chains below dragged themselves closer, wrapping around the floorboards and walls, gripping, pulling, claiming. The shadows from the walls reached up, merging with those from the floor, and the air itself seemed to thicken, pulsating with hunger. And then the room went still. Candlelight snapped out, leaving only darkness. The chains froze mid-rattle. The shadows hung suspended, patient, and the whisper of the last name, yours, lingered in the air like smoke, clinging to every breath, every hair, every heartbeat. The boy dared to look. At the desk, at the cradle, at the ledger open on the teacher's table, letters writhed and shimmered, forming shapes that were not letters at all, faces wide-eyed, mouths agape, hands reaching. And as the ledger's pages turned themselves one final time, he realized the truth. Attendance was never over, names were never finished, and the classroom would always be waiting. A black hand rose from the shadows, curling, glistening, and reached toward him. The last sound was a scraping, wet and deliberate, and the boy's scream was swallowed before it could form.